Welcome to the Hot Slice. I am creative director Josh Keown. Along with me, executive editor Denise Greer. It has been a minute, Denise. It is good to see you again.
I haven't seen you on the podcast in a while. Hey, how are
I,
you? It's good
I
to see
haven't seen
your
your face
face
since
on a
Expo.
screen. I
Yeah, I
know,
haven't seen your
right?
face since Expo. So,
No,
uh,
no, we may live in the same area, but we just don't get out and around since we're
we don't we don't get out
in
of our
our office
basements.
homes. I'm not in a basement. I have an actual office on the first
Okay, well,
floor.
look at you,
So,
executive,
yeah, that's right.
executive editor. But anyway, it's great to be back on here. I have missed doing these podcasts, and yeah, I'm just happy to be
I
back.
do. I miss doing the podcast with you. So actually, I just did a podcast recently with Jeremy, and we just flowed right into it too. And that's how you and I are as well.
Yeah,
So that's the great thing about working with somebody for, I don't know, we've worked together for 12 years now, 13 years,
somewhere
something like
around
that.
there. It's
Yeah.
decade plus for sure.
Exactly.
We
Exactly.
won't we won't we won't really. We're getting to an age where we just don't even tell it how long we've been doing it.
Exactly. Exactly. So we're
Wow.
doing this episode a little differently, guys, because we have to change it up and we have to bring you new things and always be thinking about what you maybe could want from the podcast. So we were thinking about giving you more deep dives into some things that are happening in the industry or in restaurants, things that we're seeing, and get into the nuts and bolts, into the weeds, as we say, on subject matter. So this week we've brought Thomas Reinhard from Cascadia Pizza Company in Seattle, Washington. But more importantly, he's also a practicing attorney, so he's got a lot of great knowledge about legal issues. And so anybody that knows me knows that I love my Google alerts. Like, I
You
live by
do.
having like so many Google. Like, if you want to keep up with what's happening in restaurant news, pizza industry news, those are 3 Google alerts you just tap and they come to your email every day or every week, however you want to do it. Anyway, this isn't a discussion about Google alerts. But what I noticed on Google alerts recently is there have been a lot of news articles around the idea of wage theft.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think a lot of people have a lot of confusion on, what is wage theft, and am I accidentally doing wage theft and I didn't even know it, like with my restaurant, how can I prevent it, basically? So I read those articles and I reached out to Thomas. I was like, hey, Thomas, would you like to come on the show? And let's talk about some of these legal issues that I'm seeing in the news. So you have wage theft. Another one is something that y'all probably are not prepared for as well as you should be. And that is with your estate planning, not real estate,
Yeah.
with your estate planning. Do you have a trust set up for your pizzeria? Do you have a will? Who's getting your restaurant if something happens to you? In the Google alerts, I'm seeing where restaurants and some legendary pizzerias, mind you, have had people in legal battles over who gets the rights to the business.
It's not a
And
fun thing to think about, but it's something you really have
no,
to think about and you have to plan ahead.
yeah, it's one of those things that where you like these are the big things that you're gonna miss if you don't, like, if we don't bring them up. You're like, oh
Yeah.
wait, I probably need to look at that. Like, am I doing wage theft? Do I have the proper trust set up for my restaurant so that when I want to leave it to my GM or my wife or my husband or my business partner or whoever you want to leave it to, that everything is spelled out so that you can do that. So that's what we're doing today. We're getting into the weeds on both of those topics. Legal issues in the news, Josh.
Yeah,
How do you like it?
Thomas is great, and I love the way you're evolving the podcast, and I think I love this direction, and I think the owners and operators will love the direction this podcast is going as well.
All right. So if you dig this episode, make sure you reach out to me, dgreer@pizzatoday.com. And if there's a subject that you are keen for us to tackle with one of our experts or one of our knowledgeable pizzeria operators, reach out to me, let me know, and we'll see what we can do. So hit me an email. I'd love to hear about it. All
All
right.
right,
So
so
on to the show.
Performance Food Service is proud to deliver high-quality products, innovative technology, and custom operational solutions to restaurants of all sizes across the country. The flagship division of Performance Food Group, with deep roots in the restaurant industry, Performance Food Service has been the exclusive distributor of the Roma family of brands for more than 65 years. This signature relationship has allowed Performance Food Service to become a leader in the pizza and Italian segment of food service nationwide.
With extraordinary pizza cheese comes extraordinary rewards. Only Baccio Exceptional Italian Pizza Cheese offers the Gold Club Rewards program with monthly cash back on every cheese purchase. Members also receive funds twice a year to use in their exclusive marketing store. It's their way of saying grazie to customers. Schedule a demonstration at bacciocheese.com/hotslice and discover how rewarding Baccio Exceptional Italian Pizza Cheese can be. Pizza is your legacy. Build it with Baccio.
Looking to grow your pizzeria or restaurant? Then you'll want to try the power of a cloud-based POS system. With Hunger Rush, you'll get everything you need. This fully integrated restaurant management system allows you to easily streamline operations, accelerate the delivery process, and grow your business through Hunger Rush 360 marketing. And it's so easy to use. Want AI-powered text ordering? It's built in. Need to track orders? No problem. Schedule a personalized demo at hungerrush.com today.
Okay, so Thomas, we've seen a lot of things in the news lately with restaurants, and there are a couple of themes that I'm noticing as you know, I get these Google alerts and they tell me kind of key things that are happening in, you know, pizza news or restaurant news. And something that I've seen that kind of hits my radar is I keep seeing this idea of wage theft and employers getting sued by employees for wage theft. What, you know, because, you know, you are an attorney and you're also an operator as well, you know, what exactly is wage theft in the reference of a restaurant?
Sure. Yeah, wage theft it's a fairly broad term actually. You know,
Yeah,
it's not just shorting somebody's paycheck. Of course, that's the
yeah.
most obvious thing that somebody would think of.
Hmm.
But in the context of restaurants in particular, the biggest wage theft topic really comes down to tips and who owns the tips. How are the
Yeah.
tips distributed? You know, it's a really hot topic right now for, I would say, probably the last 5 years or so. We've been seeing a
Hmm.
lot of enforcement coming, of course, at the federal level from the Department of Labor, and also at the state level as well. And so, the key thing that I always explain to other operators and clients is
Hmm.
that tips are 100% owned by the employee. And so the only thing that you are allowed to deduct from that tip is your credit card processing cost.
Okay.
Outside of that, 100% of that has to go to the employee. Now, tip pooling, of course, is allowed
Yeah.
in most
In some
states. Some
areas.
states, yes, exactly. At the federal level, it's allowed. Washington State, where I'm based out of, we can have a tip pool. There are
Hmm.
some states that don't allow it, and so that's where you really have to check jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But
Hmm.
the tip pooling can get very complicated, and so the biggest takeaway with that is managers cannot participate in a tip pool, and so in it doesn't mean that if someone can be a manager without having the manager title. So,
Hmm.
for example, somebody who maybe is a shift supervisor and is regularly directing the work of two or more employees, they
Okay.
count as a manager, even if their title doesn't say manager. And so,
Mm.
what we've seen in these enforcement actions that have happened is somebody, a former employee, typically has made a complaint saying I wasn't paid out my tips properly, and then a whole investigation is opened, and it usually uncovers some tip pooling practices or even just tipping practices in general that maybe weren't 100% kosher. And so that's where most of the wage theft issues are. Of course, there are people out there who maybe short their employees' pay inadvertently or
Hmm.
maybe on purpose. And that's usually a little more egregious.
Yeah.
But of course, right? I mean, that's the literal definition of theft. But complying with a lot of these rules is it's really complex, and we're in a unique area right now in the restaurant industry between tips and service charges.
Yeah, you did
And
an article on this recently
Yeah.
too, and it
I
was
did, yeah.
very detailed.
It's yeah, and of course, as a lawyer, you have to get into the weeds sometimes, but it's
Hmm.
definitely an in the weeds type thing. But the key difference between tip and service charge is a tip's 100% owned by the employee versus a service charge. If you disclose it properly on your menus and a line item on the receipt, that's 100% owned by the restaurant. And then you can keep that for yourself. You can distribute it out to your employees like you would a tip. You really can do whatever you want with it. And so that's where I think we're seeing a lot of restaurant operators moving toward more of a service charge model to kind of protect themselves from some of these tip issues. But the key really with wage theft is don't mess with people's tips. You know, if you depending on what your model is, right? If you're a traditional model and your servers keep 100% of their tips, you pay them out 100% of their tips. You're not allowed to keep any of it other than the credit card processing cost. And so what my best practice that I recommend on that, because your credit card processing cost can fluctuate. I do a review every month on our credit card processing cost to make sure that we're not overcharging that if our processing cost has gone down and whatnot. But that's really the biggest issue that we're seeing right now in wage theft, though, in restaurants. And I mean, we've seen a couple of local bigger chains in the Seattle area have some multi-million-dollar lawsuits. I mean, these are bigger chains, but it could really, if it's over a period of time, it really adds up.
For sure.
And then there's penalties, of course, associated with it, and all other sorts of issues. But
and bad publicity too, because then it comes through my Google News feed and I see it.
Exactly. Well, and so it's funny because if you're a layperson reading it, you're like, man, these are bad guys. They're stealing people's wages, wage theft. Well, it's really a lot more nuanced than that. And 9 times out of 10, it's an oversight. It's not really an actual, there's not an intentional theft happening. It's really just the rules are so nuanced, it's hard for people to keep up on it. And so like one operator or, chain I'm thinking of in the Seattle area, they had a 6-month window where they had an issue with a tip pool, basically, with their delivery drivers. And that 6 months of not being in compliance cost them, I think it was like around $1.5 million. It was a lot of money. So yeah, exactly. And, a lot of times too, even if you have employment practices, liability insurance, a lot of times it does not cover wage and hour complaints. So it's a scary topic.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because the U.S., it's a very much an American issue, right? Like we are we are a tipping country. Whereas if you travel internationally, a lot of times there is no tip. It's just straight.
And they get offended. They get offended if you want to give them a tip. They're like, well, no, I get paid enough. Do you think I'm, destitute and can't afford, whatever? Like I've traveled with people and they've tried to give a tip and the server's been like offended. So it's really true. Very American thing.
Couldn't be more of a difference then, really.
Yeah, exactly.
So if an operator thinks, hey, is this something I need to look at to make sure I'm not in trouble? Like, how can they go? Should they go about evaluating themselves, or should they be using a consultant? Should they be going through their accountant? Like, how do you actually evaluate where your wage issues might be?
Great question. Of course, an employment attorney is probably your best bet, who's going to be the most familiar with these rules, because there's a lot of the laws in this area at the federal level are older laws. I mean, the Fair Labor Standard Act. I think that's what it's called. FLSA is the acronym. That's almost 100-year-old law. I mean, that's a New Deal era law. And so it's been added onto over, the past century. And so it's just a really complex body of law that an employment practices attorney really is going to be your best bet in evaluating everything, right? I mean, because what happens too in these wage theft lawsuits is, at least in Washington State, our regulatory authority is called Labor and Industries, and they, when you have a wage and hour complaint, usually they'll open the book and look at all of your other employment practices as well. So they'll say, so they'll look at your handbook, for example. Were you enforcing your policies correctly? What does your handbook say? They'll send out letters to all of your employees saying, hey, were you treated fairly here? Were you paid fairly? All those types of things. So really working with an employment attorney is going to be your best bet. Accountants will know some, especially on the tipping side, but in terms of, are we compliant with the law, an employment attorney is going to be your best bet.
That's awesome. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for 1 second.
That's okay.
It happens on a daily basis with me. So there's a second issue that I sent you a note on, that I was like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm very interested in this because I've seen a couple of news articles where either families or partners or employees versus families are basically in lawsuit battles over taking over a restaurant after the owner has died.
Yeah.
And it's something that I don't think, like, I myself wouldn't like get that stuff in order, in the right manner to make sure that all of my I's are dotted and all of my T's are crossed. But when you think of, estate planning and
Yeah.
succession planning, what do you think should should be taken into consideration?
Yeah, estate planning, just in general, is so important, right? To make sure that your interests are protected and distributed the right way. Because the last thing I think anybody wants is after you pass away, whether it's expected or sudden, to have people fight over what's in your estate. And so for us as business owners, restaurant owners, it's so important to have a will. It doesn't have to be anything all that complex, but to have a will, work with an estate planning attorney. And typically what I have a lot of clients do as well as set up what are called revocable trusts.
Okay.
And so what a revocable trust is it basically, it is a part of your estate, but it's separate. And so it doesn't go through the probate process, but you're spelling out exactly how you want whatever you put in that trust, whether it's assets, cash, your business interests, how you want that to be distributed and continue to operate. But the biggest thing, especially if you have business partners, which I do, I have two other partners, we're equal partners, is in your operating agreement or bylaws, depending on your entity type, operating agreement for an LLC, bylaws for a corporation, S Corp or C Corp. You want to have it spelled out what happens in the event of the death of a member or stockholder, shareholder.
Oh, wow.
And so you really can get very detailed in that. What most people do is they have an immediate buyout provision. So, for example,
Okay.
like if I were to pass away suddenly, my business partners or the company itself would actually have the option, first right of refusal, to purchase my business interests from my estate. So whoever my heirs are. And so that really is the best way to protect your business interests and have everything spelled out ahead of time. And of course, there's still provisions for how do you value the interest at the time of death and all those types of things. But you really want to have that spelled out because that's the other thing that can happen even if you do have a provision for a buyout, right? How do you value that? And then, the estate will want, a high number. The company will probably want a lower number. And you kind of have to go through, you've got to haggle a little bit and go through an appraisal process. It's not fun for anybody, but the more detail that you have spelled out in the operating agreement and bylaws and in your trust or will, really is going to alleviate most of those issues. Now, of course, you still could have someone come and contest and say, well, that wasn't valid or whatever. That's a more rare thing. But the more due diligence you can do now on the front end and working with an estate planning attorney and really a corporate entity attorney in getting that language on how you want things to happen in the event of a death into your operating agreement and bylaws is really, really important.
And if you watch Succession on HBO, you'll see it.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
You don't want to end up like those guys. You don't want to.
I haven't watched this show. Tell me about this, Josh. What is it?
No, I'll tell you about it offline. But
we don't have enough time. Yeah.
That's a whole different podcast right there.
Absolutely. So what happens? So say an operator doesn't have any of that in the works. All they do is say, hey, in daily operations, my GM is amazing, I'm training them to take over, and then they die, is that admissible for the GM to take over the business? Like, are there any, like, it has to be in writing for it to be valid?
Big time, yeah. And especially when it comes to operations, I mean, if it's a GM who doesn't have an ownership stake, right, and maybe they were maybe that was being dangled in front of them, type of a thing, but there's nothing really that concrete. And then, let's say whoever the successors are, the family comes in and says, well, we've never liked that GM, and
Yeah.
so, if you don't have anything in writing, and even really, that's an interesting scenario because the actual operational side of it, you can write that into bylaws. It's not typically something you would do for, who do I want to operate this company? Because at
Mhm.
the end of the day, whoever becomes the new owner of that company,
Becomes it. Yeah.
right, and they can make that operational decision. So yeah, it's kind of a complex thing, but to keep people from fighting, spell out exactly how you want things to happen.
Mhm.
And especially if it's in a trust, that is already operative now. So a will basically, none of that becomes effective until after you pass away. A
Yeah.
trust, the way that it's governed, it's live, it's now. So
Mhm.
that's the way that it's all happening, and it doesn't have to pass through that probate court to make a decision. So on it, was this valid? Was it not? So maybe I'm getting too in the weeds here, but
That's okay.
essentially,
No, I love
if
it.
yeah,
That's where we want to go.
yeah,
We love the weeds.
come on. So yeah, a trust really is the best way to go in terms of at least the ownership, and then how you want the assets of that trust to be distributed and managed. So that's really where I steer all of my clients on the estate planning side, is put together a trust, have your trust own the shares or the membership interest in your company. And then whoever the trustee is of that trust upon your
Mhm.
death will be the one making those decisions. And so, it's really important that you have someone that you trust as the trustee,
Yeah.
whether it be a business partner now, or a spouse, child, whoever it is. I mean, a lot of people even have their attorney be the trustee, or there are corporate trustees out there too that for larger estates will actually
Yeah.
manage that and keep people from doing anything improper. I
Yeah.
mean, that's really the big thing, and that's their whole job. But they charge a fee, like a financial advisor, basically. So
Mhm.
that's really for larger estates. But yeah, it definitely is complex. And the last thing I think anyone wants is people to fight over, on their
Yeah.
death, what's happening. I mean, it can get really nasty and go on for a long time. And then
Yeah.
by the end of it, you paid all the lawyers, and you don't have that much left.
Yeah.
That's why people don't like lawyers. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's so important.
Yeah. Now, with okay, they've done the right thing. They've created a trust. They've outlined everything. How often should they update it?
Good question. It really depends on if you have like a material change in your business or
Mhm.
your assets, that type of thing. So, if you go out and win the lottery tomorrow, yeah, go and update some things. If you've had some operational changes and whatnot, I really think a good rule of thumb is at least every 5 years, but more
Mhm.
frequently if you've had some changes happen in that time.
Oh, that's awesome, man. You're just a wealth of knowledge. See, that's why we tap you a lot to be a contributing writer for Pizza Today magazine, because you just know a lot. And go ahead and give them your disclaimer that this is informational.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Of course, everything in this, it's informational. It's not attorney-client privilege. It's not legal advice. Consult with an attorney in your jurisdiction that can really give you advice on your business, on your situation. This is really just more a broad overview
Mhm.
and just general informational knowledge.
That's
That
awesome.
our operators are going to love. This is
Yeah,
great stuff for them,
yeah,
and hopefully you're not charging us by the hour. We're right
yeah.
under 2 minutes,
I don't
so
know.
No, no, don't worry. Yeah, yeah. It's yeah. Every point 1 minute is yeah.
Oh,
So
thank
I'll
I'll
you
give
get
you
to the
so
my
much.
company
business early.
card. We'll just make it happen.
Oh, geez, yeah.
All right. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on today and giving us a lot of great knowledge that I think a lot of people are going to take away. A lot of information to go back to their attorneys and say, hey, am I doing everything correctly? Because I think that's the key here, is we want people to get their minds going to check on their businesses.
It's just a
Yeah,
lot of
and
stuff
it
that falls under the radar. It just really falls under the radar, and before you know it, oh, now we have a crisis. So
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and these enforcement actions are happening more and more frequently. So even if you're a smaller operator, maybe you have 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, it can still happen to you, surprisingly. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people fall into the pitfall. I'm so small, it's, I don't have to worry about these things. 10, 15 years ago, that might have been the case. Today, it is not. And so really making sure you're in compliance on the employment side is really, really important.
That's great. All right. Well, have a good afternoon, because I know it's sunny and warm there and beautiful. So get out and enjoy it, hopefully. And then we'll catch up with you next time. Are you going to come? Are you going to cross the country and come to PP&E? To Pizza Pasta
I
Movies?
might try to. It's October, right?
Yeah, the first and 2nd of October.
Okay, I think I'm in town. Yeah, I might be able to make that work.
All right.
That would be
All
fantastic.
right. Well, maybe we'll see you then. If not, we'll catch you around. Okay.
Have a great summer.
Okay. Hey, thanks,
All right.
guys. Appreciate it.
Take care, Thomas. Thanks.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.